Good morning, everybody. Good day, wherever you are around the world. It's great to be with you today. I'm so lucky to get to do work that is so satisfying. For those of you that work in the safety world or have responsibility for humans in your organization, there really is nothing more honorable than helping protect people at work. And I think you're really going to enjoy the conversation with Tom today. Tom?
Good morning. It's nice to see you all here and have an opportunity to share some thoughts and to talk with Rebecca.
I have a series of questions, Tom, that I'm going to take us through. So let me pose the first one. You started really behavior-based safety decades ago. And there has been lots of discussions around behavior-based safety over the years. But I would love for you to respond to what did we get wrong in BBS? And what's holding us back from breaking the SIF cycle? You know that the SIF run rate really hasn't changed over the years, whether you're looking at local data or global data. Give us your thoughts on that.
Okay, so what did we get wrong in BBS, and then what's holding back SIF progress? They're really quite different questions. So let's take the what did we get wrong in BBS part. And gosh, we could spend the whole time just talking about that. And I think it's a worthwhile and an interesting question because I think there's a lot of confusion out there. There's, people who think BBS was the greatest thing ever done and was wonderful, and too bad that we're not doing it more. And people who think it really went backwards and it was not the right thing and it was even harmful and we should be doing HOP and related system-based activities instead or in place of. And so it's an interesting question. I think that I'll say that I don't know. It's hard to distinguish what we did wrong and what happened. They're separate things. But
Yeah.
Let's start with what happened. What happened was that many organizations took on BBS without really understanding how it worked and did it badly. And what it looks like when you do BBS badly is that you basically encourage leadership to blame the employee for incident events. And I think quite a bit of that happened. It goes back to Heinrich, who encouraged us to think that the behavior of the worker was the primary thing that needed to be addressed. Everyone way back in those days thought that was accurate. And as a result of that, leadership sort of took on the view that if we could just get these people to do the right things, these problems would all go away. And that turns out to be false in a number of different ways, and even counterproductive, and even can be quite negative when that point of view is out there. And so I think that was kind of the root of what went wrong. Now, it's worth noting that across organizations that did BBS, there was tremendous variability. It was not one thing. I mean, there were some organizations that did a terrific job with BBS and that had levels of engagement from frontline employees that were extraordinary, and really, really good, really beneficial to the organization. People that didn't usually get involved in things got involved, and they developed new skills, and they got opportunities to do stuff that they wouldn't have been able to do before. And as a result of that, the workplace got safer. It was extremely positive. But then there were others where it was just go through the motions. Well, we do these observations and we go through these steps, but what that really kind of came down to was go out and see if you can find somebody doing something wrong and then tell them. You're doing it wrong. Don't do that. You're the problem.
I I spent probably, gosh, the first 15 years of my consulting life in the field doing behavior-based safety. And the thing that always three things struck me. It was such a terrific way to engage employees at all levels in the organization. It was sustainable, which is really hard to find. And what I saw where it didn't go quite right is, there's 4 steps in a good continuous improvement process, particularly with BBS. You have to know the exposures, you have to go out and sample, you have to give feedback to help people shift behavior. And the 4th one is the one that I felt it fell down a lot, Tom. And that was, you got to use the data for problem solving, for continuous improvement. And that was the step that I saw often just totally skipped.
Yep. Yeah, I saw that too. Another thing that I think went wrong is that it got too popular too fast. We wrote books and articles and gave talks, and we were doing that for the right reasons, and we were giving out, I think, good information. But it became a fad, and people said, "Oh, what is that?" Well, that's get out and people look for people doing things unsafe and tell them about it. We can do that. We don't have to spend a lot of time being trained or learn all about these the science that's behind this, or what it looks like when it's working well, and so on. We can.
Yeah.
I've read the first chapter of that book. I think we're ready to start. And in that case, you actually go the wrong direction. You go backwards.
We humans like to make it as easy as possible on ourselves.
Yep. Yep.
Let's talk for a second about SIF.
Yeah.
So that was the second part. What do you think is the primary thing that's holding us back in breaking the SIF injury cycle?
Getting the SIF piece right is not easy. It's not like 3 steps. We know what needs to be done. We go through step 1, step 2, step 3, and then bingo, we don't have SIF exposure anymore. It's quite subtle and layered and difficult to really get to, and kind of unpredictable. So, I mean, it's a step forward just to recognize that serious and fatal events are different than small events, and that getting at serious and fatal events requires a different kind of understanding and a different kind of action, and it's subtle and layered and very hard to get to by its nature. So you can't just walk out into the workplace and start talking to people and see SIF exposure. It's sort of hidden, sort of buried, and requires some level of diligence and investigation and skill to get to the precursors that one should be concerned about that can result in a serious or fatal injury. And so it's a different way of thinking about that altogether, and requires that people understand it in order to be effective.
One of my questions that I was going to lead us into next, actually, this is a good setup, is, many organizations have very strong safety metrics, and they're still experiencing SIF events and surprised they're not expecting them to happen. And as I've thought about it, you had such a huge learning in the 2010 SIF study. And I still find so many leaders don't know about this, which is a shame because it's such a strong lever. Let's talk a little bit more about Heinrich's triangle, the inner triangle within the triangle, and how that insight can help leaders in their strategy around eliminating serious injury and fatalities.
Yeah. Well, so for just to kind of put it in context, the Heinrich idea was that frequency and severity were inversely correlated. As one went up, the other went down. And if you improved uh, injuries across the board, if you improved smaller injuries, you would also improve serious injuries. Right? That was the
Yeah.
idea. And everybody thought that. I mean, I can remember many, many times back in the day, drawing a triangle on a flip chart and saying, here are the categories, and then saying, now, if you reduce these categories, and then drawing a line right up the side of the triangle, you'll see reductions all the way up, meaning when you reduce this type of injury, you reduce that type of injury, no distinction. And I didn't question that, and no one questioned that.
No one does.
Everyone thought, yeah, that's how it works. So it was kind of a shock when a client called and said, hey, Tom, we've noticed this weird thing in our data. Our small injuries are coming down nicely across time, but we've started categorizing serious or fatal events and tracking them, and they're not declining at the same rate or in the same way as the smaller injuries are. Now, shouldn't those two lines, if you look at the line across time of small injuries, overall injuries, the recordable rate, and then you look at the line of serious and fatal injuries, those two lines should be parallel, right? But they're not. One's going down, the other isn't. This was an aluminum company who had noticed this and said, hey, what's up? And that caused us to start looking. And then we got a bunch of companies together, 7 or 8 or 10, and we aggregated their data and we looked at that aspect up close across this whole group of companies. And sure enough, we saw that same pattern over and over. And that caused us to think, well, wait a minute, something is wrong with this idea. The idea that if you reduce the small injuries, you'll also reduce the larger injuries. That something's off here. It's not this is not working. And then it occurred to a few people for us to say, well, wait a minute, let's look at those small events and see if they're all kind of the same. And sure enough, when you do that, you realize, gosh, here's a small event that really almost always is going to be a small event. And here's one that actually could be a fatality. This event, had it been done in a slightly different way, somebody could have gotten killed or hurt really seriously. So these are quite different events here. They're not the same. They're not in the same category. So that was a revolution to recognize that, to see that that's what was going on. And I think actually, even though that was, what, 15 years ago or something, yeah. 16 years ago, and since then, many large organizations have taken this approach on and made tremendous progress. At the same time, many haven't, and many still labor under the same delusion that if they reduce the smaller injuries, they'll also reduce the larger injuries. And some who see that, no, that's not the case, this is different, still have trouble figuring out how to get to it. Yeah. So, okay, we get it, they're different. But what does that tell? What are we supposed to be doing? How is it that we should be taking actions that will reduce that exposure? And it's kind of hard to measure too, because there are very few of them. So if you're a site with 500 employees, how many of those events do you have to look at?
Very few, hopefully.
Very few, hopefully. And so so it's not like you have a recordable incident rate to track. So how are we going to know if we're making progress or if we're not making progress? So it brings with it difficulties. On the other hand, there are some organizations who take this on, get their leadership to understand it, begin systematically to look for precursors, which is the central thing. Find precursors and address them. That's what has to happen. A precursor is a situation where there could be a fatality as a result of this configuration.
That's what I love about the CIF precursor concept is there's always the question was, okay, conceptually that makes sense, but what do I do? As a leader, what should I be doing? And so I'm going to give you all a little homework, if you would be so gracious. If you're interested in this sort of thing, what you need to do is you need to identify what your CIF precursors are. That's that inner piece of the triangle that really targets the potential of a serious injury or death at work. And CIF precursors are composed of a couple of things. One, you have to identify what your critical tasks and activities are. Tied to that, you want to understand what are the controls that we have in place to protect us from that critical task. And then you have to study the health of that control. Often what we find when we have a CIF event or a near CIF event is those controls aren't working properly. They're either absent, they're not complete, they're broken, people don't know how to use them. So it's understanding what are the critical tasks, it's understanding related to that, how well your controls actually work in a reliable way. And then the third piece is understanding what is it about your culture, your organization that can amp up those particular risks. So we call those amplifiers. And it's the combination of critical task, control, and amplifiers that really tells us what your CIF precursors are. It's a great activity for your organizations to go through. You can do it in a group setting, so it's very engaging. You can help build alignment around it, and it makes getting after CIF really practical. It's also, for those of you that like to measure things, a leading indicator, because it helps you understand CIF exposure upstream before the event occurs. I love this stuff, as you can tell.
So, Rebecca, that's good. That's really a good explanation. Where does decision making come in that configuration?
It's upstream of that, Tom. So it's the decisions that leaders are making at the very senior level, but also day-to-day operational decisions that affect how we are controlling the exposure around those critical tasks. If you don't think about CIF precursors in really specific ways, you make decisions that look at the outset very good for the business, but that very often impact the control reliability piece as well as the amplifiers.
So that's a revolution. That saying that the decision-making processes in an organization are directly related to CIF exposure and therefore to CIF events is a whole different way of thinking about it. And as you know, Rebecca, we've really delved deep into this, and we've done that by saying, let's analyze an individual CIF event, and then after that, a whole set of CIF events, and let's analyze them through the lens of decision making. So let's say, and now we take that approach because after seeing quite a number of CIF events and analyzing them carefully, you realize that decisions that were made sometimes months ago, even years ago, have created the exposure which didn't bite anybody for a long time, and then somebody got killed, or a group of people got killed, or seriously injured. And so getting at that through the understanding of where is the decision-making process happening and where is it going wrong or where is it insufficient is a huge step forward, but requires a different way of thinking about it.
It really does. And it's very exciting if you're a bit geeky like I am around how do we really solve issues around safety. So I bet many of you on the call have observed this yourselves, is you have a injury occur, you do a very exhaustive investigation. It's very resource rich and intensive, but then you look at the outcomes of your investigations over a year, over a couple of years, and I bet what you find is the output of those investigations is really similar. It's around retraining, it's around coaching. It's very human dependent. And I think one of the things that is so fascinating to me when you look at sift through the decision lens, it gives you, it's not that the investigation is wrong, it's just not complete. It gives you additional insight that really does help you get at some of the causal factors that are very deep in the organization, that are cultural, that are tied to decision making. And it positions you to have a whole different viewpoint about what is the comprehensive strategy for us to eliminate this potential SIF in the future. And without looking through the decision lens, you just miss that.
Yeah, so wait, this is kind of complicated. I understand behavior. I know what behavior is. That's what I can see people doing. So what's this decision-making stuff? I mean, that's a whole different way of looking at it, isn't it?
It really is.
Why is that better? Why is it better to look at it as a decision-making process rather than a behavioral process?
I think it's both. I think you've got to look at both pieces. But if you start through the decision lens, it reveals things that you will not find through a traditional incident investigation.
Yeah, but I can see behavior. I can walk out into the factory and walk around and I can see behaviors going on. So I can get a hold of that. I can walk around the factory all day and not see a single decision.
No, you have to be looking for sort of the decision footprint. How does that decision play out in real ways?
So I have to dig them out somehow. I have to investigate and find what are the kinds of decisions that occur that allow or create exposure, and what are the kinds of decisions that occur that take this exposure out.
Yeah.
And then how do we get people to recognize their respective roles in all that process? So I'm a site manager. I make decisions all day. How am I going to get better? How am I going to get better at this? Well, why aren't I just doing it right to begin with? Anyway, what's the problem?
I think a piece of the problem is that we make decisions all day long, and we're clear when there's a safety related decision like buying PPE or putting in a guard. But there are so many organizational type decisions around staffing, acquisitions, changing a raw material supplier that aren't at the offset safety decisions, but there are safety implications in those decisions that play out in really practical ways at the front line, and that part gets missed.
So you mean I make a decision and don't recognize the effect of that decision?
Yes, because it's not a safety decision, but it is safety sensitive. It has safety implications down the path of the
So I'm
injury.
a second level supervisor, and we're about to do a job, and I know that job requires 4 people. And I don't have 4 people today. I only have 3. But I know those 3 pretty well. And I have confidence in them. And I know they've done this job before. And I know if I tell them, hey, you're not going to have 4 today, only going to have 3. But so look, be careful, watch out here, that they will do that. And I trust them. And so I make the decision that we can go ahead and get that work done because I really don't want to delay it. I don't want to have to say, well, no, we haven't gotten that done yet because we didn't have 4 people. We only had 3, and I didn't want to proceed. I thought it was unsafe. I don't want to have to say that. I'd much rather say, sure, I got that done.
This highlights the complexity, right? Because one of the things that we see when we do deep dives in events with decision making is a common bias that shows up regularly. So in this, we would call that overconfidence bias. You believe you've got smart people, really experienced, and you're confident that they're going to figure it out.
Now, wait a minute. What's a bias?
It is a filter through which we view things, think about things. It happens as part of our brain to become more efficient.
Okay. So that's just weird people that have that, right?
No, that's us humans. All the humans have this.
Me? I'm biased?
You have it too, Tom.
Now, does that mean I know it? That mean that I say, well, I know that it's really doesn't add up that 3 people could do this job. I know that. And that it'll be, I mean, I know that if 3 people do it
You know
instead of
that,
4,
but you also have confidence in them. You know who they are. You know their experience. And so you have what we call overconfidence. You believe they'll figure it out.
consciously or unconsciously? Is bias conscious or unconscious?
I think it can play out. I think a lot of times it's unconscious. You're not aware you're doing this.
Right.
It all happens very quickly, right?
It could be
It
either.
could be, yeah, but it
Could be
plays out.
But the most likely thing is it's unconscious, which is a fancy word, unconscious. We don't mean anything woo-woo there. We just mean you don't know you're doing it.
Right.
It's not like you say, okay, I realize that this person could get killed, but I'm going to do it anyway. It's not that. It's rather you say, I think this will be fine. I think this will be okay. And I'm not sending people out there thinking that one of them might get killed. I'm sending them out there thinking that they know what they're doing. They've done this before. They know how to compensate. They can make it work.
And I cautioned them. I said, be extra careful because you're down a person today.
Right, right.
But here's where having understanding of the sick precursors is really helpful. So you're going to have to get work done with a 3-person crew versus a 4-person crew. If you understand CIV precursors, you can be asking these questions. So we know we're making a shift. We know that there are 2 CIV precursors that very commonly show up in this work. So let's just pause for a moment and make sure that the controls that we need to be functioning well, even when we move from a 4-person to a 3-person, are in place, and that we are intentional about ensuring that that happens.
Right. Okay. Now we've talked about staffing here quite a bit, as if that's in a really important category. How many categories of import are there? And how many?
Many.
And how would
Many.
you know? How would you know which categories are in place? How do you know? How does Krause Bell Group claim to know?
We study this. We have a very detailed system that we look at as a structure. But from a practical standpoint, for people in operations, for people that are actually doing work in organizations, there are a handful of very common biases that people really should be aware of because they play out so often. I think what I see most often is the overconfidence that could be in myself or in others. I also see something called normalization of deviance. This is really common. And all that that's a complicated way of describing. You have a protocol that's well defined in your SOPs, and over time, people drift away from it. They find shortcuts, they find easier ways of getting it done, and over time, that becomes the new standard. But it doesn't necessarily mean that we have taken a careful look at what CIV precursors are involved and are controls in place, and do we have clear strategies on how we're going to protect people in that situation.
Yeah. So
I'm going to move us on. Oh, sorry.
Okay. All right. Well, I was just going to say, in investigating these kinds of things, you can find chains of decisions that go back sometimes for years. And that can be very enlightening to leadership to recognize that, gosh, we created that situation without knowing that we were creating it. And it was a series of decisions that goes back 3 years or 5 years.
Can
and
sometimes
that
be longer, 10 years.
sometimes even longer. Yeah.
Yeah. And sometimes they're not even within your organization. They happen outside the organization.
Yep.
Love
Okay.
this stuff. The part that I think is so appealing about understanding this is I want us to get to a point where we're not solving the same problem after we do every investigation. So every time we do an investigation, we come up with really common outputs. Retrain the employee, coach the supervisor. And that very well may be part of it. But that is a recurring finding, which tells me we really don't understand the really deep causal factors. And I think looking through the lens of decision making really helps us with that.
So that's HOP.
There's some great things in HOP. You know, as a principle framework, there's nothing in HOP that I don't like. I think recognizing that humans make mistakes is really important for everybody to get. Nobody does it on purpose. Well, maybe some do, very, very rare. But to be human is to err. And I think that's one of the things that HOP sort of pulls out is to let's not forget that. People are trying to do the right thing. There's always exceptions, I know that. But generally speaking, people are trying to do the right thing. They're trying to get it right.
So
And
now
I
wait a
think
minute.
HOP pulls that out.
Doesn't HOP say it's inevitable that you're going to have these things, period? You're going to have situations where things get out of control. That's going to happen. Isn't that the HOP view?
Well,
Inevitable.
that's a piece of it. I think the idea that goes along with that HOP really promotes is we know people are going to get it wrong. So we want to create a system where it's fail safe. We can keep people safe even when failures happen.
Yeah. Okay. And that makes sense. Is that incompatible with decision analysis?
Absolutely not.
No, it's actually quite compatible.
Very compatible.
Yeah. So you tell me that decision making and behavioral approaches done well can be consistent with HOP principles?
Absolutely. It's similar to for those of us that are a little old school, is Deming's principles. You know, Deming really is the underpinning of what behavior-based safety is all about. It's
Does our
about
audience
process.
recognize Deming?
I don't know.
Are we so old?
It could be.
Am I so
It could
old?
be.
Not you. Am I so old that I remember things that our audience doesn't remember? I've been thinking about that because there's a conference coming up where I was thinking I wanted to talk about Deming a bit. And I'm wondering, gosh, will people know Deming? So you all out there, do you know Deming? Have you read Deming? Deming was a hero of mine, still is. I went to school with Deming. Have I told you this story, Rebecca?
You have not, no.
So this is very early days. It was like the first or second project that I ever did. It was with a bus company in a major city, and their concern was whether or not female bus drivers had more accidents than male bus drivers. They were convinced that they did. That female bus drivers were a hazard, and so they hired us to answer that question. Okay, and we did. And so to do that, we brought in a statistician. And the statistician, who I loved because I had done experimental psychology, which was all about statistics and experimental design, and I loved it, and I thought that was wonderful stuff. So this statistician and I got along really well, and we were having a lot of fun analyzing that data. By the way, it turned out that women were actually safer than men. That was the finding from the study. But in any case, this statistician guy brought a copy of Deming's book Out of the Crisis to our meeting. It hadn't been published yet. It was a manuscript. And this is 1979, maybe. And handed it to me, and he said, "Tom, you ought to read this, Out of the Crisis." And I liked this statistician a lot and thought he was a really smart, good, competent guy. So I took it home and I read it, and I got about an hour into it, and I thought, holy cow, this guy has got it. This stuff is terrific. and I became a Deming fan right then and there. And so interestingly, that BBS stuff was
Yes.
entirely consistent with Deming if you did it right. And in fact, Deming was the thought leader that I was paying the most attention to.
I think that's what appealed to me about behavior-based safety. So when I came to BST, many of you on the call might remember BST. That was Tom's first organization. Um, I came as a chemist, not as a safety person. But I've been involved in doing continuous improvement processes before I joined you. And when I learned about the BBS, to me, that just like, wow, I had never thought about it from that perspective. But BBS was a continuous process improvement. And that still holds steady today. Many of you on the call may not know Deming because you're not later career like Tom and I. But if you love this stuff, Google him, because his position and how he talked about continuous improvement, it holds firm for today.
Yes. Yes. If you haven't read Deming, read Deming. Out of the Crisis is probably the best
The best
book.
one.
But his
I
14 principles or 14 points are just golden, just wonderful, as applicable today as they were 50 years ago.
That does make us old though, Tom. 50 years ago. I know. All right.
Yeah.
I'm checking the time and I want to see if we can take some questions from our participants today. Pam, I know you've been monitoring the chat. Are there ones that stand out to you?
Sure. It seems like bias is always a really hot topic. We've got a couple of questions related to that. One of them specifically is, if every decision impacts safety, how can we improve this awareness among leaders so that they are more conscious of it? Bias most of the time is unconscious. What could we do? Sometimes training doesn't seem to be enough.
So now that's it. If every decision impacts safety, is that what you just said?
That's what the question says, yes.
Oh, okay. I would say that's a little too strong. I don't think every decision impacts safety. I think it's reasonable to ask, is this a decision that has impact on safety? Every time, ask that. But there's sometimes that decisions are made that I think probably are neutral or don't have an impact.
Don't affect it.
But I think the spirit of the question is if frequently, is that right, Pam? Is that how you read it too?
I think that's fair, yes.
Okay, if frequently the decisions that we make have impact on safety, and if they are biased, and then what's the rest of the question? Then what do we do?
Yes.
How do we get at it?
Sometimes training doesn't seem to be enough, is specifically what the respondent said.
Yeah. So becoming aware of so you know what a bias is, yeah? What's a bias? What do you mean biased? What does that mean?
Well, I would give a very simple explanation. I think it's a filter, but I'm not a psychologist, Tom, so you might have a better answer to that.
Yeah. Well, it means an improper assessment of probability. That's a bias.
Or a filter.
Or a filter, yeah. So I think that I can drive this car way above the speed limit after having a few drinks and talking with my friend and listening to the radio. I think I can do that safely. As I'm driving with the radio on and talking to my friend, and after having had something to drink, I don't experience that as risk. I experience that as fun. That's fun. So we would say I have a bias. I have in that case, overconfidence bias, which means that my assessment of the probability that I'm going to kill myself and my passenger and somebody else in their car is faulty. I'm not estimating the probabilities accurately. An accurate assessment of that probability would lead me to say, holy cow, slow down, throw out the booze, get somebody else to drive. This is crazy. This makes no sense whatsoever. Now, I can see that in retrospect after the crash and the person was killed. And I sit down with myself feeling pretty bad. And then I say, wait a minute, what the hell was I doing? What was going on? Well, I just didn't realize it. I just didn't think that that meant there was risk like that, and that this person that I could kill somebody. I wasn't thinking that. Okay, so that means I was biased. That's what bias means. Bad assessment, improper, inaccurate assessment of probability.
How do we help people with that, though? Because Maria, I see that that's a question from you. It's nice to see you on I was going to say on the call, on the webinar. Maria's question is, so how do we help people with that? Training doesn't seem to be enough. It might raise awareness, but how do we help people get better at recognizing bias in decision making?
So I think training is enough, but you got to do the training right. I mean, so you can become it's a series of steps. But the first step is awareness. You become aware of the fact that I'm making a decision right now that has safety implications. So what's in front of us today in our meeting, our leadership team meeting, is planning for the major construction change that we're going to do in this factory. And we've been talking about this for years. We know that we need it. We know that as a result of this construction change, we're going to have more production capability. We've got the money. It's going to work. Okay, we're ready to go. However, it did not occur to us that the way we designed this change could have safety implications. We never talked about that. We never thought about that. We thought, this is going to be great. We're going to have all this new space and all this new capability, and we're going to be able to make more product and therefore more money, and this is good for our business, and let's go. All
and
terrific.
Those aren't necessary. Those aren't bad decisions. Those are common business decisions.
Yes.
But I bet nobody asked the question, okay, so on this particular project, where are our safe precursors, and are we confident that we have the controls in place to protect people?
That's right. Are we creating exposure? That question never got asked. And as a result, we made decisions which in retrospect created exposure, and we could have known that had we asked the right questions.
Yes.
Had we been more diligent and said, wait a minute, okay, hold everything before we stamp this. What are the safety implications of this decision that we're about to make? Have we done that analysis or not? And if we haven't, then let's do.
I hope that's helpful, Maria. We can talk more about this also going out of here. Pam, I think we have time for one more.
Okay, this one came a little earlier in the webinar, and I can tell already it's going to be a meaty answer. Very simple question. How can we ensure that decisions that are made, how can we ensure that decisions are made safely on the factory floor? How can we ensure decisions are made safely on the factory floor?
So, gosh, that one's real easy. We'll just give you a 3-step process and whammo, bingo, you got it, right? Simple. No, that's a really good question, and that's not an easy answer, however. I mean, so the first thing is, are your people aware of the fact that this decision that you're about to make has implications for safety? Are you aware of it? when we analyze these, and we've analyzed several hundred of these, and we say, what was the decision that happened right before the incident? And then what were the decisions that happened before that and before that and before that? Sometimes that goes back years. It is not easy for people to recognize that, no, wait a minute, this actually is what we're talking about is a safety thing. So how do you get at that is a very important question. The good news is people can do it. We see it with our clients. We see people who get into the process of saying, in this meeting, in fact, we've seen clients who have the meeting planners in advance say to each other and to the people that are going to be in the meeting, we've looked at the agenda and we see safety implications in these three areas today. So as we're talking about this in our meeting today, we should be conscious of the fact that there are safety implications here. We've looked at this set, and here they are.
You know, when I think about that, Tom, there's two things that pop into my mind that help us, because it is complicated to do. But, you know, there's so much attention today on creating a speak up culture in organizations. So that's enabling upward communications. So that's a piece of it, is creating an environment where people will speak up. So if frontline leaders, frontline people recognize that we have exposure and we want people to surface it, having a speak up culture helps us. I think it's really what's behind pausing work. So pausing work is an opportunity to slow things down and to ask that specific question: are there any safety implications to what we're about to do?
So this speak up culture that you're talking about, how would you know if you had one or you didn't have one?
You would see people speaking up. So you would see whether it was a frontline supervisor, a frontline employee, a new employee, a veteran employee. You would see people raising questions, raising concerns, even those that might be a little difficult or not quite what people want to hear. You would see that in that environment, people feel safe to raise that question or concern. And
So
then there would be attention to it.
Why wouldn't I feel safe? Why wouldn't I feel safe to raise a concern? It seems like that's pretty easy. I just want to say, gee, did we realize that the foam that is coming off of the external fuel tanks of this piece of equipment, the space shuttle, when it's launched, you would think that that would be a pretty easy thing for folks to talk about within an organization as well functioning with such smart, great people as NASA.
You would think that.
You would think that.
That's not how it plays out. So it's really about the experience that the person speaking up receives. So are they encouraged? Are they reinforced? Are they made to feel dumb? Are they reminded it's not their place to speak up? It depends on the positive and negative consequences a person receives when they speak up that first time, whether they're likely to speak up again.
Yeah, so it's really subtle. I mean, you can have a great organization with great people and inadvertently create a culture in which you're not supposed to ask certain questions. You're not, but when I say you're not supposed to, I mean, it makes you look bad. You look good by giving answers. And
that people want to hear.
That the right answer, yes, right, a real answer. I can tell you how to solve that problem, Dr. So-and-so. I can tell you that. That's what you want to do. That's what people respect. That's how you'll look good. That's how you'll advance in the organization. You're a problem solver. You don't advance in the organization by saying, hey, wait a minute, hold everything. Isn't this a problem?
Or even more so saying, hey, wait a minute, I actually don't know how to do
that. No, sorry, you can't say that.
And that's what the speak up culture is all about.
No, you can't say that. You're not supposed to say that. You're supposed to be the one who says, I can solve that problem. Yeah. So actually, what we got to do is get a culture, make it the way we do things around here is that we really want to know what you think, and we're really not gonna be critical over and say you're stupid because you're raising these questions. We want you to raise these questions. We value having this discussion. You're not going to lose points over having this
That's right.
discussion. Yeah.
And even if you raise something that's actually not correct, having someone respond and say, you know what, I need to give you more information, that actually isn't the situation. But I want you to know that you raising it is exactly what we want people to do, because this is how we get better. It's how we protect people. So you're reinforcing the behavior of speaking up.
Yeah. Yeah. Easier said than done.
Yeah. Well, if it
But
was
I
easy,
mean,
we'd
that's the
all be
right
doing
thing.
it.
I'm agreeing with you. I'm just saying it's not real easy to do that. You can inadvertently, it's not like the leader is saying, hey, I think I'll go in there and see if I can squash people's thinking today.
Right.
See if I can keep them damn people from talking. I don't want to hear them. I don't want to hear their opinions. I'm going to see if I can figure out how to shut them up. That isn't what happens.
No.
What I think I'm doing is we're going to go in and solve some problems today. And, so it's very subtle. I can create stuff in the culture without even knowing that I'm doing it.
Yeah.
Don't even realize it. Does not occur to me that taking that point of view will create things in the culture that I really actually don't want.
If by some chance your question didn't get answered and you'd like to have a private consultation with one of our executive consultants, please send us a note. Thanks for your time today, Tom and Rebecca. Thanks for a very robust, interesting conversation, and everyone have a good and a safe day. Thank you.
Thanks for joining, everybody. Have a good rest of the week.
Thanks. Bye-bye.